July 26th is coming, and it might look like your structure is collapsing, but this Saturn movement is going to surprise you for a long time. Something in your life is about to feel unstable this week, a routine, a relationship, a plan you'd built your whole year around, and your first instinct is going to be to rebuild it exactly as it was. That instinct is the mistake. Saturn didn't come to shake the thing you're looking at. It came for the thing holding it up. On July 26th, Saturn, the planet most associated with structure, limits, and long-term responsibility, comes to a complete stop and starts moving backward. Not permanently, not punishingly, but for the next several months, its energy turns inward instead of outward, and it starts asking a question most of us have been quietly avoiding. What have I built that isn't actually holding me up anymore? Stay with me. I want to walk through what's actually happening, what it tends to feel like in real, ordinary life, and because I don't think this one deserves a rushed ritual, what to actually do with it. I said this would surprise you, and I meant that literally, because most of what people assume about a Saturn retrograde is a little wrong. Here are the 4 real things happening on July 26th, and why each one changes what this week actually asks of you. 1. Saturn isn't actually moving backwards. It's standing still. No planet truly moves backward. What happens is an optical effect. Earth, moving faster in its orbit, catches up to and passes Saturn, and for a while, from our vantage point, Saturn appears to drift backward against the stars. But the moment that matters most isn't the slow drift afterward, it's the station itself, the days around July 26th, when Saturn comes to a complete stop before changing direction. Astrologers have long treated a station as the most concentrated, most keenly felt part of any retrograde, not the whole several-month stretch. This week specifically. Emotionally, this is the part people miss. Nothing is actually being taken from you on July 26th. You're simply catching up to something you'd already let go of. A habit, a version of yourself, a yes that stopped meaning anything months ago. The ache isn't loss. It's the moment you finally looked down and noticed your hands were already empty. 2. This is the first time in nearly 30 years Saturn has done this in Aries. Saturn's full cycle takes about 29.5 years, and it hasn't stood still in Aries, the sign of identity, independence, and raw personal will, since the mid-1990s. That's not a small detail. It means whatever gets surfaced this week isn't going to feel like a generic review your life nudge. It's going to feel personal, immediate, and tied directly to who you are, not just what you're doing. Spiritually, this is less an audit of your calendar and more an audit of your identity, the raw, unpolished will underneath the roles you play for other people. If you've caught yourself sounding unusually blunt lately or noticing an old, more stubborn version of yourself resurfacing, that's not you regressing. That's the part of you Saturn hasn't checked in on in almost 30 years, finally getting some attention. 3. Something else is shifting on the exact same day. On July 26th, the lunar nodes, the points astrologers use to mark what we're being pulled from and what we're being pulled toward, also shift signs, moving into Aquarius and Leo. 2 entirely separate systems landing on the same date, both pointing at the same underlying idea. Something is closing, and something else is quietly being asked to open in its place. This matters emotionally because Saturn retrograde has a reputation for feeling lonely, like you're the only one being asked to slow down while everyone else keeps moving. You're not. The whole sky is turning a page this week, not just your corner of it. Whatever ends for you this week is allowed to end without you having to justify it to anyone. 4. Saturn doesn't get weaker in retrograde. It gets stronger. Most planets are considered a little muted when they retrograde, harder to access, turn down. Saturn is the exception. Many astrologers consider it more powerful in retrograde, not less, because instead of pushing its discipline outward onto your circumstances, it turns that same discipline inward onto you. Not to punish you, to audit you, gently but thoroughly. Spiritually, this is the difference between a teacher who corrects you in front of the whole class and one who sits you down quietly afterward. The second one is harder to sit through. It's also the one you actually walk away having learned something from. If you felt an unusual heaviness settle in over the last few days, a sudden reality check, a project that stalled without explanation, a conversation you've been avoiding that suddenly feels impossible to keep avoiding, that's not bad luck. That's Saturn standing still, asking you to stand still with it for a moment before you go any further. I don't think review your boundaries and discipline means much until you get specific about what that actually looks like in an ordinary week. So let's get specific. The first thing Saturn is auditing is your boundaries, the limits you've set or haven't set around your time, your energy, and your peace. And it tends to reveal itself in one of two directions. Either your boundaries have been too loose, you've said yes so often to so many people that you're quietly exhausted and don't fully know why, or they've been too rigid. You've built walls so high out of old protection that you've ended up isolated instead of safe. Saturn retrograde doesn't ask you to guess which one is true for you. It tends to show you, plainly, over the next several months, usually through the same relationship or situation repeating itself until you finally address it. This isn't about becoming colder or more guarded. It's about honesty. Somewhere in your life right now, there's a yes that's actually costing you more than it's giving back. Saturn wants you to name it. The second thing Saturn is auditing is your discipline, not in the punishing hustle culture sense, but in the older, quieter sense of the word. The habits and routines you've built to actually get you where you say you want to go. Moving forward, Saturn tends to reward consistency without asking too many questions about it. In retrograde, it asks the harder question: consistency towards what exactly? You may start to notice over these coming months exactly where you've been cutting corners, not out of laziness, but out of quiet exhaustion or a plan that was never realistic to begin with. That's not a failure being exposed, it's a flawed foundation being caught before you build another floor on top of it. And there's a third, quieter layer underneath both of these: unfinished business. Saturn has long been associated with time and accountability, and retrograde periods have a well-worn reputation for surfacing things we thought we'd already put away: an apology never given, a decision never finalized, a responsibility you told yourself you'd deal with eventually. Eventually tends to arrive during a Saturn retrograde, whether you feel ready for it or not. None of this is Saturn being cruel to you. It's closer to a structural inspection, the kind you'd actually want done on a house before you added another story to it. You probably won't feel all of these. Most people find one or two that land, and that's enough to know the transit has found you. 1. A boundary conversation you've been rehearsing instead of having. Not a dramatic confrontation, just the smaller, quieter version. Telling a friend you can't keep being the one who reaches out first. Telling a manager a deadline was never realistic to begin with. Telling someone you love that you need more space than you've been asking for. You've likely known the sentence for a while. What's new is how loudly the silence around not saying it has started to feel. 2. A sudden, uncomfortable clarity about where you've been cutting corners. Not guilt exactly, more like finally being able to see a pattern you'd been politely not looking at. The workout you keep starting and abandoning, the finances you've been avoiding opening, the project you've told people is almost done for longer than it should have taken. Saturn retrograde has a way of making the avoidance itself more exhausting than just finally doing the thing. 3, an old responsibility resurfacing seemingly out of nowhere. A message from someone you owe an honest conversation to. A bill, a document, a loose end you thought had quietly resolved itself. It hasn't. Saturn retrograde has a habit of returning exactly the things we were hoping time would handle for us. 4. A low, steady heaviness that isn't sadness exactly, more like gravity. Not a crisis, just a sense that something needs to be taken seriously that you've been treating lightly. If your body's felt a little more tired than usual, or your patience for chaos has thinned out fast, that's worth listening to rather than pushing through. If 2 or 3 of these landed, that's enough. This transit doesn't need to overwhelm you to be real. I want to be honest about something. This isn't a transit that responds well to a quick fix, and I don't think it's fair to pretend it does. Saturn doesn't reward speed, it rewards follow-through. So here's the most honest version of what to do I can offer. Pick one boundary, not all of them. Somewhere in your life, there's a specific yes that's costing you more than you're getting back. You likely already know which one. This week, name it plainly, to yourself first, in writing if that helps, before you try to say anything out loud to anyone else. I'm going to stop being available after 8 p.m. for work messages. I'm going to stop offering to pay when it isn't fair anymore. One sentence, not a manifesto. Pick one piece of unfinished business and close it. Not perfectly, just honestly. Send the message. Open the account, have the 10-minute version of the conversation instead of the perfect, fully prepared version you've been waiting to feel ready for. Saturn doesn't need it to be graceful, it needs it to actually happen. Rebuild one habit at a smaller, more honest scale. Not the ambitious version you set up and abandoned, the realistic version you could actually sustain for the next 4 months while Saturn's still retrograde. Smaller and consistent beats big and abandoned every time under this particular transit. That's the whole practice. No candles required, just choosing one honest thing in each category and actually following it through. Because this transit runs until December and it will keep circling back to whatever you leave unfinished this week. I think it's worth being honest here too. Saturn retrograde can tip into something unhealthy if you let it, and I don't want to gloss over that. The risk isn't laziness, it's the opposite, using this transit as permission to be harder on yourself than the moment actually calls for. Saturn's audit is meant to be honest, not punishing. There's a real difference between I let a boundary slide and I'm going to fix it and spiraling into I failed at everything and need to overhaul my entire life by December. The first is Saturn doing its job. The second is fear wearing Saturn's name. If you notice yourself making big, sweeping declarations this week, quitting everything, cutting everyone off, tearing the whole structure down at once, slow down. Saturn retrograde is asking for repair, not demolition. The goal isn't to burn the house down, it's to finally fix the crack in the foundation you've been walking past for months. There's a decent chance you've felt this exact shape before, even if you never called it Saturn. Maybe it was after finally setting a boundary you'd avoided for months, and instead of the relationship falling apart the way you feared, it actually got steadier. Maybe it was closing out something old and unfinished, a conversation, a debt, an apology, and feeling lighter in a way that surprised you, like you hadn't realized how much weight it had actually been. At the time, you probably called it relief or good timing, or just finally getting around to it. That's a fair explanation. It's also worth noticing that this is a pattern your life already knows. Delay, then honesty, then a kind of settling, whether or not you'd ever have put Saturn's name on it. I don't think Saturn is punishing anyone by standing still this week. I think it's asking a much smaller, more honest question than that. What have you been holding up that was never actually built to last? And are you willing to look at it directly instead of just holding on tighter? You've got until December before Saturn moves forward again. That's not a deadline meant to rush you. It's just enough time to actually fix what needs fixing instead of patching over it one more time. Thanks for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next one.